The heavy silence of the mansion seemed to deepen around Eleanor as she stood in the grand library, her eyes scanning the towering shelves lined with dusty tomes. The afternoon sun filtered feebly through stained glass, casting muted hues over the neglected room. She had spent hours here already, piecing together the fragments of the estate's history, yet a nagging sense of incompleteness tugged at her. Something was hidden, something just beyond reach. Her fingers brushed absent-mindedly along the spines of books until they halted at a particular shelf that felt different. The wood was colder, the grain finer. She pressed her palm against it, the surface giving slightly beneath her touch. With a tentative push, the shelf creaked and shifted, pivoting slowly to reveal a narrow, dark passageway beyond. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. A secret door concealed behind the books. How had she missed this? The air that escaped was thick with the scent of age and secrets long kept. Lighting a candle she had brought with her, Eleanor stepped cautiously into the passage. The walls were lined with cracked plaster and faded wallpaper, remnants of a time when this clandestine corridor had been traversed regularly. Cobwebs brushed against her cheeks as she moved forward, the floorboards creaking underfoot. At the passage's end, a door small and unassuming stood ajar. Pushing it open, Eleanor entered a cramped room bathed in shadows. The faint glow of her candle revealed a cluttered space, a wooden desk piled with yellowed letters, photographs curled at the edges, and trinkets that seemed to whisper stories of lives once lived here in secret. She picked up a letter, the ink faded but still legible. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, betraying the anxiety of the writer. As Eleanor read, the voices of the past began to emerge, tales of love and betrayal, whispered threats and silent sacrifices. Each envelope she opened seemed to pull her deeper into the mansion's tangled history. A sudden noise behind her, a distant creak, made her start. The house was old, she reminded herself, settling her racing heart. But the thought lingered, was she truly alone in discovering this hidden chamber? The discovery of the secret passage and room was more than a mere curiosity. It was a key turning point. The letters hinted at family members who had been erased from official histories, identities hidden beneath layers of deception. Eleanor realized that the mansion was not just a relic of Victorian grandeur, but a vault of secrets waiting to be unearthed. She spent hours cataloging the contents, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders. Each letter was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that might finally illuminate the shadowy murder that had haunted the estate for over a century. As dusk fell outside, Eleanor closed the secret door behind her, the candle flame flickering in the growing darkness. She knew this was only the beginning. The mansion's walls held their breath, and so did she, ready to confront whatever truths lay ahead. With a final glance back at the hidden room, Eleanor stepped into the corridor, the mystery deepening with every step she took. The attic's secrets were beginning to unfold, and with them, the story of a family's past, complicated, tragic, and waiting to be told. She paused at the threshold of the library once more, the question echoing in her mind: who had hidden this passage, and why? The mansion was no longer just a building to be restored. It was a story to be uncovered, and Eleanor was its reluctant chronicler. As the shadows lengthened, a newfound resolve settled within her. The past would speak, and she would listen. And so, with the secret passage behind her and the letters clutched tightly in her hands, Eleanor Blake stepped forward, ready to delve deeper into the enigma of the Victorian mansion and the century-old murder concealed within its walls. But unknown to her, eyes watched from the shadows beyond the garden, and not all who sought the truth wished for it to be found. End of. The candle flickered, casting long shadows across the aged paper that Eleanor held delicately in her hands. The attic was silent, save for the faint creak of the mansion settling and the occasional rustle of the brittle letters as she turned them one by one. Among the faded ink and looping Victorian script, the voice of Lillian echoed through time, revealing a secret that had been buried for decades. Eleanor's eyes scanned a particular letter, its margins smudged with tears, or perhaps the passage of countless years. "My dearest James," it began, "though the world would condemn us, I cannot deny the fire you have ignited in my soul. Our love must remain hidden, a fragile thread in the tapestry of this cursed family. But I fear betrayal is closer than I dare admit." Eleanor's heart quickened. Here was a woman trapped by societal expectations and family honor, confessing to a love forbidden and fraught with danger. The letters revealed the clandestine meetings between Lillian and James Harrow, the family's servant, a man whose loyalty was as enigmatic as the shadows that danced on the mansion's walls. The room seemed to close in around Eleanor as she imagined the whispered conversations beneath moonlight, the stolen glances across the garden maze, and the quiet desperation of two souls yearning against the tide of convention. She rose and walked to the attic window, peering out into the darkened estate where the garden lay in silhouette. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fading roses, a stark contrast to the warmth of the glowing hearth in the room below. Turning back to the letters, Eleanor found a passage hinting at a betrayal that shattered the fragile bond. Lillian's words were laced with pain and accusation, naming no one directly, but leaving a trail of suspicion that tangled the family tree in knots. Eleanor's mind raced. Could this betrayal have sparked the violent event that haunted the mansion's history? Motivated by a sudden urgency, she spread the letters across the attic floor, grouping them by date and sender. The fragile documents whispered of love, fear, and deceit, painting a portrait of a family fractured beneath the surface of respectability. Eleanor traced the connections with a pencil, sketching out relationships that twisted like the ivy climbing the mansion walls. Her fingers trembled as she uncovered a letter from Margaret Blake, her late aunt, written in a stark, no-nonsense hand. It spoke of suspicions, warnings, and a plea for discretion. The tone was different from Lillian's poetic lamentations. It was pragmatic and edged with fear. Eleanor realized that the scandal had permeated the household, involving not just the lovers, but those who sought to protect or exploit the fragile peace. As the night deepened, Eleanor's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, a soft thud from below, like footsteps or a shutter closing. She paused, listening intently, her skepticism wavering under the mansion's eerie spell. The past was no longer distant. It was breathing around her, urging her to unravel the truth. Determined, Eleanor made her way down to the main hall, the floorboards creaking beneath her boots. Her mind pieced together fragments of the letters and the shadows they cast on the present. The forbidden romance was no mere footnote. It was the fulcrum upon which the family's darkest secret balanced. In the drawing room, Eleanor found an old portrait of Lillian and James, faded and cracked, but unmistakably intimate in its depiction. Their eyes seemed to hold secrets, their smiles tinged with sorrow and defiance. Eleanor studied the painting, a silent witness to a love that had defied time and, perhaps, reason. Back in the attic, she resumed her reading, uncovering hints of meetings in the garden, labyrinth, whispered arguments, and a final, desperate letter where Lillian wrote of a plan to escape the mansion and the shadows that stalked her. Eleanor's breath caught. Had someone betrayed that plan? Was the murder an act of jealousy, revenge, or fear? The mansion itself seemed to respond, the wind rattling the window panes and the house settling with a mournful groan. Eleanor's investigation had taken a crucial turn. The letters were no longer mere relics, but keys to unlocking a secret that had festered in silence for a century. She paused to gather the scattered letters once more, her hands steady despite the storm of emotions within her. The truth was close, tangled in the echoes of the past, waiting for her to bring it to light. Eleanor knew that the coming days would test her resolve, but the mystery of Lillian and James had ignited a fire within her, one she could not extinguish until the final secret was unveiled. With a last glance at the flickering candle, Eleanor whispered to the shadows, "I will find the truth, no matter where it hides." And with that vow, the attic fell silent once more, cradling its secrets until the dawn. The dusk had settled into a deeper shade of blue by the time Eleanor Blake decided to take a solitary walk through the garden. The estate, sprawling and neglected, held its breath beneath the moonlight, shadows pooling beneath twisted hedges and ancient oaks. Eleanor's footsteps were muffled by the soft earth, and the cool night air brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of damp leaves and forgotten blooms. She had come here seeking solace, a brief respite from the mounting pressure of her discoveries within the mansion's walls. But solace was not what she found. As she traced the gravel path winding past the overgrown rose bushes, a flicker of movement caught her eye just beyond the gnarled branches of a hawthorn tree. Her breath caught in her throat. There, barely discernible in the moonlight, was a shadow, shifting silently near the garden's edge. Eleanor froze, her heart pounding in the hush of the night. Who could be here at such an hour? The mansion was miles from the nearest village, and she had not heard the rumble of a carriage or the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. The figure did not move closer, merely lingered, as if waiting or watching. Eleanor's instincts, honed by years as a journalist, chasing stories, urged caution but also curiosity. She crept closer, stepping lightly, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness. The garden around her was alive with subtle sounds. The rustle of leaves whispered secrets as the wind teased the branches overhead. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to echo the mansion's own haunted past. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the leather-bound notebook she carried, a talisman of sorts as she ventured deeper into the unknown. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the garden, stirring the ivy that clung to the mansion's ancient stone walls. The shadow flitted away, dissolving into the darkness like smoke on the breeze. Eleanor exhaled sharply, a mix of frustration and adrenaline flooding through her. She had been so close to uncovering the identity of this mysterious watcher. Yet now they had vanished, leaving only questions in their wake. She stood there for a moment longer, eyes searching the gloom for any trace, any clue. But the garden was silent again, save for the soft sigh of the night air. With a deep breath, Eleanor turned back toward the house, the weight of the encounter settling heavily upon her shoulders. Inside, the mansion seemed colder, the shadows longer and more insistent. In the dim light of her study, the flickering fire cast dancing silhouettes upon the walls, ghostly echoes of the secrets she was unraveling. Eleanor sat down at the heavy oak desk, her mind racing. She uncapped her pen and began to write, her hand moving swiftly across the pages as she recounted the evening's events. This shadow in the garden was no mere figment of her imagination. It was a tangible sign that the past was not yet done with this place, that the family secrets she sought to uncover were guarded jealously by unseen eyes. With every word, Eleanor's resolve hardened. She would not be deterred by threats or shadows. The truth was here, buried beneath layers of dust and deception, and she was determined to bring it into the light if it meant confronting the darkness itself. As the fire waned and the mansion settled into silence, Eleanor's thoughts lingered on the figure in the garden. Who were they? Friend or foe? Protector or predator? The night held its secrets close, but Eleanor knew one thing for certain: the game had changed. From this moment on, she would watch as closely as she was watched, and she would be ready. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of a forgotten name, a promise of revelations yet to come. Eleanor closed her notebook, her eyes fixed on the window where the garden lay cloaked in shadow. The mystery deepened, and the night was far from over. The small reading room of the town's historical archives smelled of aged paper and dust, a scent Eleanor found both comforting and invigorating. She had taken a seat at the largest table, its surface scarred from decades of use, and spread out the carefully preserved letters she had found in the attic alongside a collection of old ledgers, newspapers, and parish records Mr. Jameson had kindly gathered for her. The green-shaded lamp overhead cast a warm pool of light, illuminating the delicate handwriting of the century-old correspondences. Eleanor adjusted her glasses and leaned closer, the scratch of her pen breaking the silence as she jotted notes. Each letter, penned by Lillian, revealed glimpses of a life shadowed by tension and secrets. But Eleanor was determined to see beyond the subjective voice of these personal accounts. She needed facts, corroboration, something to anchor the swirling suspicions in undeniable truth. "You'll find, Miss Blake," Mr. Jameson's voice interrupted softly, "that the official records sometimes tell a very different story than personal letters." He lifted a fragile, leather-bound parish register, his fingers trembling slightly with age. Eleanor watched as he carefully turned the brittle pages. "See here," he said, pointing to an entry dated 2 years after one of Lillian's letters described a family tragedy. "The records show no mention of a death or scandal at the mansion during this time. Yet, the letter you brought alleges a grievous betrayal." Eleanor frowned, her mind racing. Could the letters be exaggerations, or perhaps attempts to conceal other truths? "Precisely," Mr. Jameson nodded. "There's often a motive to rewrite history, especially in families with influence and property to protect." The revelations stirred a new energy in Eleanor. The family's story was more tangled than she'd imagined, layered with deliberate omissions and possible deceit. Later that afternoon, she returned to the mansion, the weight of the documents heavy in her satchel. In the kitchen, Mrs. Cartwright was preparing tea, the familiar aroma mingling with the distant ticking of the old grandfather clock. Eleanor laid out her findings. "Mrs. Cartwright, the records don't align with the letters. There are gaps, contradictions. What do you make of that?" The housekeeper's hands paused in their work, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Sometimes, Miss Blake, what's written in the books isn't what truly happened. People have their reasons for hiding things." Eleanor met her gaze, sensing a wall behind those words, a warning, perhaps. "Do you know more than you're letting on?" Mrs. Cartwright sighed, the lines on her face deepening. "This house has held secrets for a long time. Not all of them are safe to uncover." That night, Eleanor stood at the attic window, the fading light of dusk casting long, eerie shadows over the estate's sprawling grounds. The cold air whispered through the cracked glass, carrying with it the rustle of leaves and distant calls of night birds. Her thoughts churned restlessly. The discrepancies she had uncovered meant someone had carefully controlled the narrative of this family's past. But who and why? Her journalist instincts flared. This was no longer a mere curiosity. It was a puzzle demanding to be solved. But as the shadows deepened, so did the sense of foreboding. Some truths, Eleanor realized, came with dangers she had yet to face. Determined, despite the rising unease, she resolved to follow the threads wherever they led, even if it meant confronting those who wanted the attic's secrets to remain buried forever. The creak of floorboards outside the attic door startled her, and she turned sharply, heart pounding. In this house of whispers and shadows, Eleanor knew one thing with certainty: the past was not done with her yet. And neither was the mansion. The heavy wooden door groaned as it swung inward, releasing a draft that carried with it the faint scent of rain and earth. Eleanor stood near the grand staircase, her eyes scanning the figures entering the mansion's expansive foyer. One by one, they crossed the threshold, some with hesitation, others with a confident stride that suggested a claim to the legacy this house represented. First was Margaret Sinclair, Eleanor's distant cousin. She moved with the elegance of someone accustomed to drawing rooms and silver spoons, her dark hair streaked with strands of dignified grey. Her sharp gaze swept the room quickly, noting the peeling wallpaper and the layer of dust on the grand chandelier. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she took in the state of the mansion. "It's not quite the picture I had in mind," Margaret said softly, almost to herself, yet loud enough for Eleanor to hear. Behind her came Charles Hargrove, a burly man with a booming voice that filled the space far more than his presence deserved. His worn tweed jacket seemed at odds with the opulence the mansion once held. "Well, I'd say this old place has seen better days," he remarked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth as he looked around. "But there's value here, you can bet on it." Eleanor's brother, Simon, arrived shortly after, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the formality of the others. Sandy-haired and with an expression that betrayed his skepticism. He offered Eleanor a supportive nod as he took in the surroundings. Last to enter was Beatrice Finch, an elderly aunt with a quiet presence that somehow commanded attention. Her delicate hands clutched a brooch shaped like a Kia family heirloom Eleanor had only seen in photographs. Beatrice's sharp eyes took in every detail, from the cracked banister to the faded portraits lining the hall. "So, this is it," Eleanor said, breaking the silence as she stepped forward, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Our family home." The group moved into the drawing room, its once lavish decor now a faded echo of grandeur. Eleanor gestured toward the fireplace, the hearth cold and emptied of logs. "I've started looking through some of the letters I found in the attic. There's more to this house, more than just dust and cobwebs." Margaret settled into an armchair, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "The past has a way of lingering," she said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of warning. Charles scoffed. "Ghost stories won't pay the bills. We need to think about what's valuable here and who's going to get what." The tension in the room thickened like the fog that often rolled across the estate grounds. Eleanor knew the investigation she had begun was no longer hers alone. The arrival of these relatives introduced a new layer of complexity. Each person carried their own motives, their own secrets. Later that evening, Eleanor found herself alone with Beatrice. The older woman produced an old photograph, its edges worn and yellowed with age. It showed several family members gathered on the mansion's grand steps, their faces a mixture of smiles and guarded expressions. "This house has seen much," Beatrice whispered, her voice fragile but resolute. "Some truths are buried deeply, but they have a way of surfacing when least expected." Eleanor's fingers traced the image, feeling the weight of history pressing down. "Do you think any of us are ready for what lies beneath?" Beatrice's eyes held a glint of something unreadable. "Readiness is a luxury. Curiosity and courage are what carry us through." As night embraced the mansion, Eleanor sat by the flickering fireplace. The crackle of flames filled the quiet room, shadows dancing on the walls like specters of the past. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the unrest within her. Her thoughts drifted to the letters, the secrets, and the faces that now shared this space with her. The family reunion was not just a gathering. It was a collision of histories and hidden agendas. Eleanor knew that to uncover the truth, she would have to navigate these treacherous waters carefully. Who among them could be trusted? And who might be hiding something far darker than mere family rivalry? The answers lay somewhere within the walls of the mansion and the tangled web of relationships that now surrounded her. But Eleanor was determined. For the story, for the truth, and for the legacy of the house. She would see this mystery to its end of them, if it meant confronting shadows that refused to fade. And so, the night deepened, with secrets poised to unravel and alliances waiting to be tested. As Eleanor prepared to face whatever the family reunion might bring,